I'm Dan Ayres from Product Management.
And I'm Embry from Engineering. Today, Dan is going to help you navigate the upcoming A2L world and the changes associated with it. If at any time you have a question, click the question button to the right of the player. We'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Aaron. Hopefully you caught last month's Lunch and Learn, where Aaron provided an introduction to all things A2L and answered some questions regarding how the transition will affect you. Today, though, we're going to do a little deeper dive on what to expect from a product standpoint. Now, we're not quite ready to provide specific answers on things like performance ratings, model numbers, or pricing, but we are able to discuss our preparedness for the A2L transition, as well as some high-level details regarding what to expect from your NGH products later in the year. First, let's start with the most common question I get asked. Will NGH be ready, and when can we expect new product? First, I can assure you, NGH is completely prepared to meet the needs of the market for the new A2L products. If you remember the SEER 2 phase-in way back in 2022, NGH was the first manufacturer listed with M1 product families listed in the AHRI database. Our team was ahead of schedule for that project, and we're tracking to be the same, or better, on this one. Many of our designs are already finalized and could be production ready this quarter, but having said that, don't expect to see the new equipment this summer. If you hadn't heard, the government issued a 1-year sell-through period for split systems and a 3-year sell-through period for package equipment on R410A, which is good news for both us and our customers. Unlike the M1 transition to SEER 2, where the deadline was based on installation date, this refrigerant transition utilizes a manufactured date, which allows for installation throughout 2025. This will help our customers manage their business easier and avoid having so-called dead inventory. Since there is allowance for a 1-year sell-through, in theory, NGH could manufacture equipment all the way up to December 31st, 2024, and that inventory could still be sold and installed throughout the entirety of 2025. But just because that's allowed doesn't necessarily make it a good decision. A2L is definitely coming, so at NGH, we have to identify the best way to meet the needs of our customers while still providing them the new technologies of the market. So look for our new A2L compliant products in the market closer to the fourth quarter. And I promise, we'll give you plenty of notice so you'll be able to manage your inventory however best suits your business. Now that we've discussed timing, the next question invariably is, what's changing? Well, let's start with some of the things Aaron told us last time. These new refrigerants are mildly flammable, which means we need to be able to detect a leak and enact mitigation. So you'll see new sensors on all our indoor coils and air handlers. In addition, while R454B has similar pressures and performance to R410A, it's still a completely different refrigerant. And a completely different refrigerant means a completely different compressor. So you'll see all new Copeland products in our residential split systems later this year. Many of these new compressors will offer increased performance over their R410A predecessors. So our engineers were able to use this increased efficiency to reduce the size of the condenser coil in some of our models. This means you'll see a reduction in size for some of our new split systems. In some cases, that could mean a move to our smaller footprint, but most reductions will be in the height of the new product. Either way, our technicians can look forward to smaller, lighter units, which will make it easier to transport, easier to set, and hopefully help save some strain on their back. Since we talked compressors, obviously the next part is the metering device. TXVs are specific to the refrigerant for which they are designed, so we'll be bringing in all new TXVs as well. Now, while these new metering devices will be different, the change in performance and function is internal to the TXV. So, much like the R22 to R410A transition of 15 or so years ago, it will be a unique product, but not necessarily a unique installation. That's pretty much it for the major component changes, but that's certainly not every change. During our last Lunch and Learn, Aaron spoke at length regarding detection and mitigation of A2L refrigerant. To refresh everyone's memory, if a leak occurs in the evaporator coil, our system needs to be able to detect the leak and enact mitigation measures. Part of detecting the leak is making sure the leaked refrigerant pools to a point where the sensor is able to identify it. So we've added some obstructions in the evaporator coils to ensure the leaked refrigerant stays near the sensor. In many cases, these coils will look very similar to the existing models, but there are some minor changes in the form of sheet metal additions which will help assist with this function. Now I know what you're thinking, isn't that going to impact the airflow of the system? Well, not to worry. We made sure the new additions do not affect performance. So rest assured, these new coils will maintain the same nominal airflow as their R410A counterparts. Another change you'll see in our cased coils is an update to the tubing design for the liquid and suction lines. In the world of A2L, we want to minimize opportunities for leaked refrigerant more than ever. And one of the greatest opportunities is where the line set brazes into the coil. Every field braze point is another opportunity for a leak, which requires a refrigerant detection system, or RDS. Historically, these braze points terminate outside the cabinet of the cased coil or air handler. But with an A2L, this would require detection and mitigation at the braze point. So we decided to make it easier for our contractors and use the RDS system already installed with the evaporator. We upgraded the tubing design to allow additional room for brazing inside the coil cabinet. A braze inside the cabinet means contractors can utilize the same RDS that ships with the coil, thereby removing complexity from an A2L installation. Just one more example of how we design our products with the contractor in mind. So, now that you've peeked behind the curtain of an A2L impact, I think you'll agree that changes to our equipment shouldn't be too impactful to your daily business. But, since we had to overhaul our product line, we also looked for opportunities to remove complexity from our portfolio. Opportunities to simplify product lines and consolidate features. Basically, looking for ways to help you run your business while managing fewer SKUs. The first area we looked to simplify was our cased coils. Our engineering team was able to utilize coil designs which would work for additional capacities. Basically, one coil for multiple outdoor matches. This means fewer cased coil SKUs in our new product lines and fewer models to stock for our distributors. Next, we reviewed our air handler line. Our current portfolio offers 3 tiers of performance, separated by the blower motor used. A PSC line, our B64B series, an ECM product line, B64E, and our constant CFM variable speed models, the B64V. As a product team, we realized that's a lot of models to carry in addition to a full line of split systems. So we looked for ways to collapse our offering while still providing solutions for our customers. So our new air handler line is going to be much easier. Instead of the 3 separate lines, we'll have 2 air handler families, an entry level and a premier line. The entry level is going to maintain a low-cost blower motor strategy, meaning we'll use whichever motor allows for the required matches while still keeping the cost as low as possible. In most cases, this is shown to be a PSC. But some of the larger sizes will still feature an ECM blower to make sure we can maintain the performance our customers need. Our Premier line is going to feature a constant CFM variable speed blower for those customers looking for maximum comfort and top-of-the-line efficiency. These air handlers will be the preferred match for our 2-stage and inverter-driven products, making sure those products are performing at the highest level. All A2L compliant air handlers and coils will feature a TXV to ensure simple product matching and consistent product features. So you'll see, just because we had to bring our new equipment into regulatory compliance doesn't mean we stop there. We use this opportunity to provide additional value to our distributors by simplifying our product offering and show our contractors some love by reducing the size of our outdoor units, providing a simple RDS solution, and taking the guesswork out of an A2L installation. A2Ls are certainly a change to the HVAC world, but with NGH on your side, it's nothing we can't handle. By understanding the impact to the product, learning the changes we made and why they're important, and being upfront with your customers, you'll take the mystery out of this new refrigerant and help your customers breathe easier.
All right, Dan and I are now ready to answer some questions. Thanks, Dan. It's great information. We're going to take some questions now. The question button is to the right of the video player, and if you can't see it, you may be in full screen mode. You should be able to hit escape and see that question button. So we've got a few that have come in already, but please feel free to ask those questions right now. We'll get started. So, Dan, first question.
what changes can we expect on our outdoor systems, our split systems?
Yeah, that's a good question. I touched on a little bit of that, but you have to remember that really the concern is the refrigerant indoors into the conditioned space. So for the outdoors, as far as the A2L, there's not a whole lot of changes, but we are using a new refrigerant. So obviously, as I mentioned, you have to have the new compressors and then the TXVs to handle the new refrigerants. So those will be unique, but really beyond that, it's going to be pretty much the same equipment that our customers are used to. Not a lot of reconfiguration of compactor or contactors or capacitors or anything like that. But there will be as I mentioned, a footprint change on one model is going to go from the large to the small. So that model is actually going to get a little bit taller coil, but with the reduced length and width, we think that's probably still a net positive. And then everything else will be either the same or maybe just slightly shorter. On the packaged units, one of our models is actually going to go from the extended back down to the standard footprint. So you see a little reduction there too. So, but beyond the unique actual HVAC components in there, the compressors and the things that actually do all the magic to make it hot or cold in your house, the only real change you're going to see is just maybe a little bit smaller unit, whether that be size or width or what have you.
Yeah, excellent. Maybe one other detail I would add to that is you're right. We don't have to worry about refrigerant from the outdoor system leaking into the home. It leaks outside where it's diluted and safe. But we do have to think about potentially collecting leak refrigerant in the control box compartment. So there are a couple small changes there. We're going to a contactor that's rated for A2L refrigerant. So it's important to pay attention to your replacement part lists and make sure you're using an appropriate contactor in those applications.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, so there is a new component there.
So I think we've addressed already is what kind of sensor is going to be on outdoor splits. Well, there won't be a sensor on outdoor splits.
Yeah.
If a refrigerant leak occurs there, it will leave the system into the outdoors and be diluted and therefore safe. So.
Yeah, but the packaged units will have one on the airstream side. So on the evap side, because that's going to push all the air and then any leaked refrigerant potentially into the space. So you will see a sensor there on some of the models. But another benefit of having a microchannel coil that uses so much less refrigerant is the charge is so small that the safety standard, and help me out here, you know a little bit better than I would, but the safety standard allows that we do not need to sense that refrigerant.
Yeah, under 4 pounds.
Under 4 pounds.
Total charge. Yep. Pre-sealed systems.
Yep. So on some of the small pack, in particular the ACs, we're going to see an advantage for us of a little less complexity because we don't need to detect a leak.
Excellent.
Do the charge amount.
So what's going to happen to our R410A listings in the directory? As we move into this, what happens to those old AHRI listings?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. For purpose of this conversation, you have 3 states: active, you have production stopped, and then you have discontinued. And for a contractor, all 3 of those are essentially the same thing. No real impact. You can still install any kind of a system or listing that has either one of those designations. For us, we have to make that change to let the industry and the governing bodies know whether or not that's a unit that we're still currently making. Have we just stopped it and we're bleeding out inventory? Or is it something that we've actually made everything we're going to make, we've shipped everything we're going to make, and now that's just out in the market? Again, either one of those 3 are still going to be, there's no real impact to an install. You're still welcome to do an install on any one of those. So we'll move all of our stuff to production stopped as we see fit, and then discontinue. Thank you. Sorry for that 3rd one, but we'll do that all the way up until 2025 to let our contractors still do the installs if they do have the older systems, and then obviously past 25, they're no longer allowed to be installed. So we'll move all of those to the discontinued or obsolete.
Are there any product changes beyond the refrigerant change itself that are coming for 2025?
Yeah. So as we're going through, and your team and myself and some of my other product managers will look at our products, competing products, how can we make it a better product? And so we kind of have this hopper of ideas of when we can implement them. And so when you're going to touch the equipment like we're doing for this, it's a good opportunity to kind of push some of those through. So we do have some improvements. As a reminder, you are going to see on the coils that have the sheet metal stuff, some airflow direction things. So you'll see those, but we also were able to collapse some of the models. So I mentioned the air handlers. You're going to see a much more focused product line, so a lot fewer boxes to stock. We're actually able to do that on some of the cased coils as well. So you're going to see a few flex match coils, like a 3 and a 3.5 tons. So instead of having unique SKUs, you're able to collapse those a little bit, which is beneficial. But But beyond that, it's there are going to be new models, but it's going to be really familiar with what our customers are used to installing.
Excellent. Are we making any changes to furnaces?
So there will be some changes on the manufactured housing side. In terms of some venting in some ways that we make sure that, we're able to vent refrigerant in the event of a leak properly and whatnot. On the residential side, we're not going to see hardly anything though. We're going to have our sensor that's going to basically do all of the magic in the coil, and then that's going to wire into the furnace, which we'll have outlined in our install instructions, of course. But from the actual product standpoint, there's no changeover. So if you have a furnace today, you're welcome to sell that next year with a 454 system.
Excellent. Let's say question here is, if I have an evaporator coil in the field, am I able to reuse that coil in an A2L application with an A2L outdoor?
Yeah, we're not going to have a retrofit kit or anything. And part of that is due to changing the flammability rating of the coil. We're not able to do that. The safety hazard, I forget how it's actually called out. But also you wouldn't have any place for your RDS system because that Delta plate's not going to have any kind of a hookup for that. In addition, I mentioned some of the brazing improvements we're going to do to allow line set termination inside the cabinet. That wouldn't be an option there. So unfortunately, the older coils, any legacy inventory, that'll have to be installed on legacy equipment. But the good news is, we do have a year sell through. So, 18, 19 months from today or so.
Right. Excellent. Question here is, are we going to have to supply a new line set with every new install?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we went back and forth on that. But again, with having a braze point, that's a potential leak point. So if it's a potential leak point, you have to have some kind of a refrigerant detection. So we made the decision to bring that line set all the way into the cabinet because any braze points inside the cabinet are handled by our RDS. So that makes it easier for the contractor. Well, they don't have to worry about getting dinged on an inspection or anything like that. So it really does depend on the line set. If you have enough, I know most time right now people will just cut it and stub out and then braze in an intermediary piece. Our recommendation is going to be that if you're going to use an intermediary piece, it has to be at least 10 foot from the system. That gives enough room for it to be mitigated and diluted below the LFL. The one advantage that we do have with our coils, though, is that our braze points are at the top of the coil. A lot of them are down below. So even if you're doing a retrofit system, there's potential that you won't need to pull a line set because you can use that extra room to terminate all the way into the coil cabinet. If that's not the case, then either you're going to have to do a 10-foot intermediary stub or you will have to pull a new line set. It's just going to kind of depend on the install.
Right. And I can add some more detail to that as well. Nothing about the safety standard requires us to replace a line set when we're replacing the system. However, per ASHRAE 15.2, we are required to visually inspect that line set for leaks, perform a nitrogen sweep and a pressure test, both high pressure and pulling a vacuum on it. So if the line set you have isn't able to pass any of those things, then it will have to be replaced.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thanks for the color there.
Another question here. Can we still get replacement coils and compressors or really any component for our 410A equipment?
Yeah, and that's still going to be an option, just like it is today with R22, even though, those are getting fewer and far between. Our suppliers are still going to support those products for replacement needs. So we'll do the same for coils, compressors, anything that's unique to the 410 system. Again, just like R22, that stuff's still going to be available.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. That's a good question here. Can we use R410A in an R454B system? So the old refrigerant in a new system. Yeah,
that's obviously not going to work. For nothing else, the thermal properties of it. The compressor is not designed to run 410A. The TXV is not going to run 410A. So from a mechanical standpoint, it's not going to work. But also the safety standards on all of that as well. That's not something that we're going to be able to condone or recommend. It's just it's not going to be an option there.
Okay, so we got to match the gas on the nameplate to the gas we're using. Yep, very good. So heat pumps are growing in popularity.
Yeah.
And is NGH doing anything to help with this adoption and additional popularity of heat pumps?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And obviously, if you look at where the industry is moving, that's clearly the path forward. There's some stuff we're doing in particular areas where, if you say, hey, I have a gas furnace, I want to be green, let's go all electric. Well, your gas furnace just has that one leg of power there. So if you're going to an all electric setup, you have to run a whole second leg, tie it into the panel to get the electric heat. that can be very cost prohibitive. So we're actually developing an air handler right now, be released here in the next couple of months. That'll run on 115 volt power, so you don't have to pull that second leg of power. Now in that setup, your heat pump would be your sole means of heat, so you wouldn't have the resistance heat as a backup. But in certain climates, looking at maybe areas in California or just any of the warm weather climates where you want to move from gas to an all-electric setup, that's going to help you without having a big burden on your install cost. So yeah, we'll have that available here probably in late Q2.
Excellent. Are we going to continue featuring rotary compressors in some of our models?
Yeah, that's a good question. So our split line, just like today, is all scroll compressors. And our packaged unit line, some of those do use the rotary compressors, but looking at new compressor strategy, and as we're moving into the A2L world, we are going to go all scroll on that product as well. So the answer to that is essentially no, with the exception of our inverter drive products. Inverters, basically, the rotary compressor is really the solution there. So outside of the IQ drive for the rotaries, yeah, we're going to go to all scroll solution on both residential and manufactured housing.
Excellent. So this might be a question more for me, but it says, will the installation manual show how to calculate the lower flammability limit, or LFL, and determine the refrigerant concentration limits for the space being served? And the answer is yes. So our installation instructions will give you all the information you need to make a successful installation with R454B. And that includes, we'll have a table that has the appropriate refrigerant weights for that piece of system and what the minimum area you can install that system in. And as we talked about last time, our refrigerant charge weights are relatively low. It's very unlikely you're going to run into a situation where the space where that system is too small for the charge in play. So we'll definitely provide all that information.
I see there's just one here about this be available. Just like our last presentation, this should be available on YouTube when we're done. So
yeah, absolutely. This will be available afterwards. And we do have an FAQ document on our website where we add all these questions, including the questions we're not able to get to. So all those will be answered and available for you on the internet.
Great. Yeah, and there's a lot coming in. I see one here about fully variable speed ECM air handlers being discontinued. That is not correct. So that's going to be our premium line. The premier line is going to be all variable speed. So that's going to be your solution for anything two-stage, inverter drive. That'll still have a full offering there. What is going to get consolidated is kind of anything that's not that. We're currently, it's a mix of PSC and ECM motors. And, you use whichever one you want. That's one that's going to be consolidated to, whichever's the lower cost strategy. So,
yeah. There's a question here asking if line sets are going to require a flush and what type of oil will be used in the new models. R454B and its compressors use the same oil that we use today in R410A. So oil compatibility, not a problem. That's not true, by the way, if you're working with R32. So be careful with that. But for a line set of an existing R410A system, the standard is going to require that you do a nitrogen sweep of that and that you do, as I mentioned before, that high and low pressure test. But we don't have to worry about oil compatibility between 410A and 454B.
I can take one here that says, talking about brazing inside the cabinet, it says we're going to have to do it with the door on. That's a great question I forgot to mention. So we're actually making a change to that top door for the coil just for that exact reason, where now we have basically the two doors. And so in that scenario, you'd have to put the door on, chase it up the line set somewhere out of the way, braze it, and then run it, put it back on. Well, that's obviously very cumbersome, not a good solution for a contractor. So we're putting a seam on those right at the braze point, the line set points. So it'll be a two-piece door. You pull that off, do your brazing. Once it's complete, you put the two of them on there. And that, it's much easier to get to the line set and make sure you got it set in there. So that's a great one.
Yeah. There's a question here about how does the RDS in the evaporator section wire into the furnace? And that's a great question. And I think you'll see that it's actually pretty simple. We're essentially placing the RDS in between the thermostat and the system. If there's a leak event, it will take over those signals, essentially take the thermostat out of play, and it will start controlling the system instead. So you're going to see that you're essentially making those thermostat connections how you always have. Probably the biggest difference being that your Y connections to the outdoor and to the indoor need to be separated now. And the reason for that is one of the things that the RDS needs to do is turn off the compressor, and we do that by opening that Y signal. But we also want to turn on the circulating blower, and we'd like to do that at the highest available flow rate. And so we use the Y signal for that. So we need those two signals to be separate. And that's really the most significant difference in how they wire up. And that leads into a follow-up question about, what happens if this RDS and this sensor stop working, if they've decided they failed. The way this will be wired up and the way the sensor itself works, it does some self-checks, and it knows if its sensor is fouled or something has happened to it, so it's not working. And essentially, it will not allow the system to operate until that's been addressed. So there's some fail-safing in there as well.
Getting some questions here, and I've actually had this a couple times the last few days about swedge fittings, compression fittings. What's our solution for there? And it seems like that's usually stemmed from most people being concerned about using a torch around a mildly flammable refrigerant. But it's important to remember how most of those installs would be going is that when you bring it in, the refrigerant's still going to be contained in the system. So when you're doing your torch work and you're brazing in, there's no refrigerant around there. So you're going to pump down the system, to sub 500. You're going to braze it in, and then you're going to do a nitrogen purge on it and see how well that holds. And so at that point, there's no hazard because the refrigerant's in the actual condenser. So once you verify that you have a good braze and there's no leaks there, then the torches are put away, and that's when you'd actually introduce refrigerant to the system. So we are going to stick with the braze fittings. I see a lot of questions about the compression fittings. I don't know if your team's reviewed those at all. It's not something that I've looked at.
Yeah, so mechanical fittings are still allowed per the standard. The one requirement being that they have to meet that UL 207 requirement, and your manufacturer of the fitting equipment will be able to tell you if that's true for their fittings. And of course, they have to be installed per their instructions. But if that's done, that's still viable in the line set. There are some questions about if we're changing the length of the swages on our base valves, and we're not. So those are staying the same as they are today.
There's one here that it says, I guess they missed the last lunch and learn, and is R454 the only option the industry will shift to? And that's a great question. Most of the manufacturers have gone to R454B. It's not the exclusive solution. R32 is another option that's out there. I know some of the Asian manufacturers are going to that as well as one domestically. So it's not going to be ubiquitous, but it does seem to be the predominant solution for most contractors.
And we feel like R454B is the right solution because of its similarity in properties to R410A, because of its oil compatibility we talked about a second ago. And remember, the reason we're doing this is to lower GWP values. It has a significantly lower GWP value than R32. So we think in the long run, this refrigerant is going to have a longer lifetime in the industry than R32 might.
It's hard to keep up with all the questions that are coming in. Will there still be installations in crawl spaces and attics? I don't know if it's good news or bad news. Nobody likes crawling into those, but unfortunately, there's no change to that as I understand.
Yeah, so there's nothing that specifically precludes that. Again, we've got to look at those space, dimensional calculations. But again, very unlikely that you're going to have a problem with that.
There's a question here about training material. I guess beyond the A2L here, answering some questions. As far as maybe best practices on the install instructions, that's something your team's looked at pretty thoroughly, haven't they?
Yeah. So we will have additional training materials available in addition to what we're doing right here. You can look for that on our website. But as we talked about last time, I think it's important to remember that for 95% of what we do, the industry best practice today continues to be the industry best practice going forward. And if you're doing good installs today, you're going to be doing good installs going forward with R454B as well.
Yeah, that's great. Asking about TXVs or pistons. Currently, so you maybe take a step back to the SEER2 transition we had. It was two changes kind of rolled in at the same time. It was a new test standard. So the way that your team develops the equipment and then we test it and verify that it performs as we advertise, that all changed. It was different measurements and different ways that calculated to give you the new SEER2 rating. But in addition to that, there was also an increase in the efficiency level. So that efficiency level for us kind of sailed the ship on piston solutions for a majority of it. So we're mostly TXV right now, outside of some straight AC matchups in the north for fixed orifice. But in the A2L world, we are going to go to all TXV. So
Okay.
that we'll be doing away with pistons at that point.
Excellent. So question for you here, Dan. On our air handlers, will we be able to switch from left to a right configuration still?
Yeah, we're not making any change to our air handlers are four-way multi-poise currently, and so there's no change to that. No cabinet changes or whatever else, the coil and the drain pan setup, that's all going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, absolutely, we're going to continue to support those.
I've got a couple of questions here that get into performance in cold climates, and will we see difference in BTU ratings as compared to total? As compared to R410A today, total versus sensible. And the answer is no. We're really targeting the same performance levels that we have today. So, our 4-ton AC, our 4-ton heat pump is going to be very similar in its performance to today's system. And really where we see differences sometimes, like you mentioned, is we've been able to shrink the unit perhaps due to the properties of our 454B.
Yeah, and it also allows us on our current 5-ton setup on the base efficiency AC. That's currently a 2-stage product, and with the extra little bump that we get with the 454, we're going to get that back into a single-stage option for the AC. So that's another benefit there. I see one here about a BTU cooling difference between the A2L compared to 410. And this would probably be a better question for you, but we're actually seeing a bump in that.
Yeah, that's actually what I was saying. Was really, as far as ratings go, we're going to target the same levels that we're at today with regard to actual capacity versus nominal capacity. So these systems should apply very similarly to what you do today, if not exactly the same.
Yeah.
I've got a question here. If there will be dry nitrogen-filled R410A condensing units offered past the 2025 deadline, and they're remembering here something like that happened with R22 back in 2008.
Yeah, that's not anything that we're going to be doing. Obviously I can only speak for what NGH does. I'm not privy to what any other product teams are doing with competitors, but we got asked that a lot, and it's something that we kind of reviewed just to make sure we did a little history lesson before we finalize our product strategy. But we're not going to have any dry set units or anything like that. It's kind of the popular question.
Yeah, and we've also had some questions about, are these systems going to come charged? And yes, they will. We're going to have refrigerant charge, factory charge in the system, just like we always have.
Great. So here's one about contractors needing to get recertified for R454B.
Yeah, refrigerant license is not changing. So as far as the licensure, there's nothing to do there, is my understanding. However, we do want people to understand what's different about these systems and go through training from us or from whatever local training sources you might have to be familiar with what's going on. But the actual refrigerant handling license is not changing as far as I know.
Great. Here's a good question that kind of is a nice segue for our next Lunch and Learn. It says, what compressor type and manufacturer are we using for 454B? So our residential split line still is going to continue to feature an all Copeland scroll compressor strategy. And we've reached out to Copeland, and they were nice enough to have a representative for our next Lunch and Learn. And so we're going to do one of these where we get to actually really kind of dive a little bit deeper. Maybe anybody that wants some in-depth technical questions regarding compressors, the team from Copeland is going to be able to jump in on that. So
yeah, that'll be exciting.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, I think that's the time we have. Yeah. So appreciate everybody's questions, and I hope you learned some things. And these questions, along with some others that we didn't necessarily get a chance to answer, will be answered on our FAQs on our website. So really appreciate your time today. And I do want to close by saying something similar to what we said last time, that NGH has spent a lot of time thinking about the design of our product and making our customers successful in their businesses. And I think you're going to see that as you get more information. I think of this as sort of like a bowling alley. There's a gutter on both sides. One gutter is not being concerned about this at all, not thinking it's a big deal. It is a big deal. It's a change in how our industry works, and we need to understand it. But the other gutter is being too worried about it. And we don't want to fall in either one. And I think we have a nice middle ground here we're working on where, installers have been successfully installing equipment in people's homes, including furnaces that are fed by natural gas, for many, many, many years, and we can definitely do this. And we're your partner in making this successful. So really appreciate your time today. So
Well said.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.